A single photograph taken in rural Vietnam in April 2026 has now become the center of a huge online debate. At first glance, the image doesn't seem that unusual. An old farming truck is seen slowly crossing a railway line, somewhere in Dak Lak province. Inside the vehicle are a grandfather and his two grandchildren. But the photograph, sadly, was not taken by a bystander. It was captured by the dashcam of an oncoming passenger train, just seconds before impact. According to reports, the truck was attempting to cross an unofficial railway crossing that had been built by local residents, rather than train authorities. These crossings often have no warning lights, no barriers, and no staff monitoring them. As the vehicle moved onto the tracks, the SE9 train was approaching at high speed. Investigators later confirmed the conductor repeatedly sounded the horn and also applied the emergency brakes. But the stopping distance simply was not enough. The collision threw the truck violently into a nearby field. The grandfather and one grandchild survived with serious injuries, but 10-year-old Tien, who can be seen riding in the back of the vehicle due to limited space inside the cab, passed at the scene. There is footage which is being shared openly on social media of the moment of impact and the aftermath. I wish I hadn't seen it, nor did I want to see it, and I recommend that you all avoid watching it too. If you look closely at the image, you can make out the moment of fear on Tien's face. But there was also another controversial aspect to this whole horrifying situation. Some viewers began claiming the photograph appeared to show the grandfather sitting in the passenger seat, rather than behind the steering wheel. In Vietnam, vehicles are left-hand drive. If true, some people believed it could suggest one of the children may have been driving the truck moments before the collision. Authorities later confirmed an investigation was ongoing, but no official findings supporting those claims were publicly released. Even so, the image remains deeply unsettling, not only because it captured the exact final seconds before disaster, but because nobody looking at the photograph would immediately realize they were witnessing someone's final moment. At first glance, the photograph looks completely ordinary. Three friends squeezed together for a selfie during a weekend away at a caravan park on the Northumberland coast. They are smiling, relaxed, comfortable around one another. Nothing about the image suggests that within hours, one of them would be in a shallow grave. The man smiling in the middle of the picture, 24-year-old Darren Bonner, had absolutely no idea the people standing beside him were about to become the very last people to see him alive. Darren was described by his family as loyal, trusting, and kind-hearted. His mother later called him a beautiful soul who would do anything for the people he cared about. Friends said he was easy to influence and eager to please others, especially the people that he considered family. One of those people was a man named Richard Spottiswoode. Spottiswoode owned a garage where Darren worked, and over time the two became close friends. But their relationship also revolved around criminal activity. The court later heard the pair were involved in the growing and selling of the devil's lettuce. In July 2017, Darren travelled with Spottiswoode and Spottiswoode's girlfriend, Lucy Byrne, to Cresswell Towers, which is a caravan park, where they were having a weekend vacation together, and the selfie was taken during that trip. And looking at it now, knowing what happened afterwards, I always find it amazing how an innocent picture can now deliver such dread. According to prosecutors, the atmosphere inside the caravan changed dramatically after an argument broke out between Darren and Spottiswoode. Spottiswoode had become convinced that Darren was a spy for a rival gang. Exactly what was said during the confrontation remains unclear. But sometime during the early hours of the morning, the situation turned violent. At trial, Spottiswoode admitted placing Darren in a headlock, although he claimed he was only trying to calm him down. Medical evidence later revealed the injuries were far more severe. Darren had suffered extensive bruising, marks consistent with strangulation, burst blood vessels in his face, and repeated blows from what experts described as a rod-shaped weapon. At some point, Darren stopped breathing properly, and instead of calling for help, Spottiswoode made another decision. The court heard that Darren, critically injured and unconscious, was loaded into the back of a van and driven away from the caravan park in the middle of the night. CCTV later captured the vehicle leaving the site. Spottiswoode stopped near an isolated stretch of coastline between Cresswell and Lynmouth. There, prosecutor said, he dragged Darren through a gap in a dry stone wall and placed him inside a hastily dug shallow grave hidden in undergrowth. He was stripped of all of his clothing, covered with branches and shrubbery, and left out there alone. However, the case takes an unexpected turn here because Darren was still alive, but barely hanging on to life. Hours later, a dog walker passing nearby heard what sounded like loud snoring noises coming from the undergrowth. Police were called, and when officers arrived, they discovered Darren curled in the fetal position inside the shallow grave, shivering, semi-conscious, and unable to respond properly. He had suffered catastrophic brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen during the attack, but somehow he was still fighting to survive. Darren remained in hospital for more than 2 weeks, before finally passing away from his injuries. His mother later said nurses began calling him Lionheart because of how hard he fought to stay alive. Richard Spottiswoode was convicted of Darren Bonner's murder in 2018 after a jury rejected his claim that the killing was accidental. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years before parole eligibility. Lucy Byrne, Spottiswoode's girlfriend, was cleared of murder but pleaded guilty to assisting an offender after helping cover up the crime and lying to police. She received a sentence of 30 months. The final photograph of Ryan Dunn looks like any ordinary night out. Taken inside a Pennsylvania bar late on June 19, 2011, the image shows Dunn smiling alongside friends, drinks on show, with no signs that only a few hours later he would be gone. By that point, Dunn had already lived a life most people could only associate with chaos and adrenaline. After helping create the CKY videos alongside Bam Margera, he became one of the breakout stars of Jackass during the early 2000s. Friends nicknamed him Random Hero after his willingness to step into dangerous situations in all areas of life. Unlike some of the others though, Dunn developed a reputation for taking stunts even further than producers expected. There was nothing he wouldn't do. But that cavalier attitude meant that years of injuries slowly began catching up with him. During the filming of Jackass No. 2, Dunn suffered a serious blood clot injury after being dragged by a horse, an incident that reportedly left him physically and emotionally shaken for years afterward. I remember seeing an interview with him during this time and he was absolutely miserable. Around the same time, he was also diagnosed with Lyme disease and reportedly withdrew from many of his friends while dealing with his depression and health problems. Still, by 2011, his career now appeared to be recovering once again. Friends later said he seemed optimistic about the future, excited about new projects, and proud of how far he had come. But then came the night of June 19th. According to investigators, Dunn had spent several hours drinking at Barnaby's of America in Westchester, Pennsylvania, alongside friends including Zachary Hartwell. Witnesses later claimed he did not appear heavily intoxicated while inside the bar, though toxicology reports later revealed his blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal driving limit. Some people say he had 8 drinks. Some say he had 11 drinks. And then, shortly after 2:30 a.m., Dunn left the bar and got behind the wheel of his Porsche GT3. Zachary Hartwell was in the passenger seat. Minutes later, police estimated the vehicle reached speeds of between 130 and 140 miles per hour, before veering off Route 322, smashing through a guardrail, striking a tree, and bursting into a fireball. The crash was so severe that investigators later said the car had essentially disintegrated on impact, and these pictures support that theory. Both Dunn and Hartwell's time on this earth came to a close instantly. Friends later admitted that Dunn had always driven aggressively and collected multiple speeding citations over the years, whilst friend Bam even recalled a terrifying earlier crash where Dunn flipped a car repeatedly at almost the exact same location. After Ryan's demise, Bam's mother April heartbreakingly said that deep down, she had feared for years that one day his love of fast cars would eventually catch up with him, and now the smiling photograph taken only minutes earlier suddenly becomes a haunting final image and a stark reminder to never, ever drink and drive. This photograph was taken only hours before the horrifyingly powerful floodwaters arrived. In it, a group of smiling young girls stand together at Camp Mystic in the Texas Hill Country, dressed in white after evening activities, surrounded by friends, counselors, and the kind of summer atmosphere that parents trust completely. This image should be a reminder of a summer to remember forever. But for many of the girls in that photograph, it would become one of the final pictures ever taken of them alive. Camp Mystic had operated near the Guadalupe River for generations and was viewed by many families as a tradition passed between mothers, daughters, and sisters. The youngest campers stayed in a low-lying section of the camp known as the Flats, where cabins with names like Bubble Inn and Twins sat close to the river and near the camp's central activity areas. Many of the children there were only 8 or 9 years old and were attending summer camp away from home for the first time. On the evening of July 3rd, 2025, the girls attended activities, climbed Chapel Hill overlooking the river, and eventually returned to their cabins for the night. Then, during the early hours of July 4th, the weather changed dramatically. Around 1:30 a.m., thunder began cracking across the camp, and the power reportedly failed shortly afterward. The girls were plunged into darkness, with only battery-powered torches if they were lucky. By roughly 2 a.m., counselors in cabins closest to the river were already reporting water entering the buildings. Camp staff began waking children and rushing some girls toward higher ground inside the recreation hall, while others climbed hills behind the cabins in darkness. But near Bubble Inn and Twins, something far worse was happening. Floodwater from both the Guadalupe River and a nearby creek suddenly converged around the cabins housing many of the youngest campers. Former staff later described the water as swirling around the buildings from 2 directions at once, almost like a whirlpool consuming anything that came close. Within a short period of time, the flood rose with terrifying speed. Some survivors later said the water reached nearly to cabin ceilings, while children climbed onto bunk beds trying to stay above it. Camp director Dick Eastland reportedly drove through the darkness, attempting to rescue girls trapped inside Bubble Inn and the nearby Twins cabins. According to reports, he managed to load several children into his vehicle before the floodwaters overwhelmed it and swept the truck away. He later succumbed to the torrents during this valiant rescue attempt.
Yeah, and through the chaos, the sisters remembered the bravery of the camp staff and counselors. Some gave their lives protecting their children. Among them were directors Dick and Edward Eastland. While the girls say they owe their lives to those heroes, they also carry the weight of those lost.
It's nothing short of a miracle with how quick the water rose. And even for the girls who didn't survive, I believe that Jesus was there with them, holding their hands, and when the waters rose, and comforting them.
Elsewhere, counselors desperately tried to keep the children calm while guiding them through darkness, debris, and violently moving water. One report claimed girls clung to clotheslines to avoid being swept away. By sunrise, the camp had become the center of one of the deadliest flood disasters in modern Texas history. Parents later arrived to scenes of devastation, searching through piles of soaked mattresses, stuffed animals, children's shoes, and waterlogged trunks decorated with stickers and handwritten names. Some fathers reportedly walked the riverbanks themselves, searching for daughters who were still missing. What makes the final group photograph so devastating is how completely normal it still looks. It simply looks like children enjoying summer camp together during a Texas summer evening. Children living what looks to be an idyllic life that most people could only dream of. And yet, within only a few hours, they would be experiencing a true nightmare. The photograph remained online for only a few minutes before moderators removed it. But for the people who saw it, the image became impossible to forget. An 18-year-old student stood inside an empty classroom in Moscow, staring directly into the camera, with a strange, almost unreadable expression on his face. Behind him, lying motionless across a desk, was his teacher. What disturbed people most was how the teenager looked. Rather than trapped in a rage or suffering from shock and just staring into space, he looked totally fine. And what nobody looking at that photograph realized at the time was that the person posing in the picture would also only have moments left on this earth. His name was Andrey Emelyannikov. To the people who knew him, he did not seem dangerous. Friends and classmates described him as quiet, withdrawn, and polite. He rarely argued with people or stood out. He enjoyed science fiction novels, video games, music, and archery. One friend later said he tended to keep all of his emotions trapped inside himself, rather than talking openly about what he was feeling. Another classmate remembered him as someone who never raised his voice. Nothing about him appeared especially alarming on the surface level, but underneath that exterior, something may already have been collapsing. In 2017, Andrey was studying at the West Complex Continuing Education College in Moscow. One of his instructors was a 44-year-old teacher named Sergei Danilov, a retired army officer and father of 3 children. Students pretty much all described Danilov as strict but fair. He pushed students hard, but many also remembered the educator as supportive and patient. One former student later said, "He was like a father to us." Others described him as the kind of teacher who always gave struggling students another opportunity to improve. However, according to classmates, tension had developed between the teacher and student after the teenager began missing classes. Reports suggested the teacher had warned him about possible expulsion if things did not improve. Exactly how deeply that conflict affected Andrey, that remains unclear, and there is no definitive motive for what happened next. On the afternoon of November 1st, during a break between lessons, the atmosphere inside the college seemed completely normal. Students moved through hallways as they always did. Teachers prepared for the next class, and somewhere inside the building, Andrey followed Danilov into an empty classroom. Most students nearby later said they heard nothing unusual to suggest what was happening. At some point during those moments, the teacher was attacked with a sharp kitchen tool, and his time was ended right there inside the classroom. Afterwards, Andrey took several photographs at the scene and uploaded them to his social media account. Then came the final image, the selfie. What emotion are you seeing on his face? What do you think he was thinking as the camera captured his image? Just moments after this selfie was taken, Andrey's time on this earth, it also drew to a close. He met his end by his own hand, with the aid of the circular saw that we can see in the background. In the days afterwards, the school brought in psychologists to help traumatized students to process what had happened. Meanwhile, the internet exploded with speculation. Some blamed violent media, others focused on disturbing online communities and horror-themed forums he had reportedly visited. Friends said Andrey spent much of his time immersed in online subcultures. They said that he reportedly used imagery from My Little Pony on social media, so to some degree he was a brony. He was also fascinated by the Silent Hill character, Walter Sullivan, a fictional killer consumed by isolation and delusion. Looking back now, those interests took on a far darker meaning after the attack. But the people who actually knew Andrey the best said that there was simply no answer. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.